Hey Kerbal Space fans, welcome to part 3 of the quick build video series. When I started I had no idea it was going to be a series, but yes, it's a series. So here's the third and final part. So I was able to fly all 4 of them up and dock them. The tanker's still there, of course, and it's still full, of course. And I wanted to show you guys some of the modifications that I had to do. There was some test flying, some not making it into orbit. A couple of changes had to be made to a couple of the ships, but nothing major. First of all, these two, Shuttle 4 and Shuttle 3, made it fine. These two are the ones that give me the least amount of trouble. Especially Shuttle 4. This one seemed to make it into space and make it to the station no problem whatsoever. Shuttle 2 made it into space real easy the first time I flew it, but after looking at it, once it was finished and all ready to go, I started looking at it, and I noticed to myself, has a lot of fuel, has a lot of intakes, big old wings. One turbojet is not enough. So I just used the cubic octag trick, took advantage of the real estate here in the back and put twin turbojets, and it worked really great. After that, I mean, I never tried it with one, but with two, got into space, no problem whatsoever. And then Shuttle 2, which you guys remember, or I'm sorry, this is Shuttle 2. This is Shuttle 1. If you guys remember, was the one that I added the RCS to. I realized actually that the RCS balls that I was playing around with, that sounded weird, were completely unnecessary, since it has 3 capsules, and each of the capsules have, well, 2 capsules in one cockpit, and the 2 capsules have 10 RCS each. This thing just naturally has enough RCS to get here. I just had to add the blocks. So yep, all 4 of them made it. I docked them up to the station, transferred the crew out of the tanker, because the tanker brought up all the orange suits, and even flew them back just to see how they worked in the atmosphere. I didn't lose any of them. They all made it back. I will show you that, because this is actually the second set of them that I brought up here. The maiden voyage sets, so to speak, are actually all landed and parked in front of the hangar. Here they all are. So Shuttle 2 brought back an extra passenger. Shuttle 4, which is right here, Jeb flew it back. I transferred him to the tanker to it and brought it back, and I left the original pilot of this one as crew of the station. So yeah, we left 2 crew members, brought back 2. I only had to double up on these. So yep, here are all the orange suits back, and here are all the original shuttles. Now they made it back fairly dry. This one had very little in the way of rocket fuel left. Actually, it's one of the ones that did better. This one required a lot of transferring fuel back and forth, but it worked okay. This one just flew weird, but it after I started it up and put the hoses, what happened is when I tried to fly this one originally with these crazy compound wings that I made and whatnot, it was wobbly, and because of being wobbly, it was hard to control. But with one pair of struts here in the back and this strut to, you know, strengthen this wonky neck piece, it came under control fine, and it was actually one of the easier ones to fly around in space and deorbit. This one was a lot more trouble than I expected it to be, mostly because of the Rapier. The Rapier engine works great in air breathing mode, but is really fuel hungry once you put it in closed cycle mode. So I had to lighten it up. This is the one that I removed the RCS balls from it to reduce weight, and reducing every bit of weight that you can reduce works a lot for this kind of ship with the single Rapier. I emptied all the oxidizer out of these tanks here. I took no RCS other than what the capsules had. This one was full of both liquid and rocket fuel. These side ones were just liquid fuel. And with the 4 intakes and the single Rapier running, I was able to get it to above 1800 meters per second and above 30 kilometers. So I was most of the way into space before I had to transfer over to closed cycle on the Rapier. and that's the way you got to do it. The other good thing that I found out about these now that I've been playing with these nacelles is they have good air intake, but they have zero drag. So unlike when you're air hogging with the ram air intakes, which open or closed have drag, these open or closed don't. So using these for additional intakes, and now the fact that they also have fuel is great. I mean, almost all of these planes have some kind of nozzle. Actually, well, these two do. I haven't looked at the specific stats on this one over here that Shuttle 4 has. So yeah, pleased to report none of them really had any major issues. None of them actually crashed. I didn't lose any crew member in the making of this whole setup. And I will, of course, be bringing them down, the other two, and recovering all of these. The other thing I wanted to cover in this video is this. This is just a beacon. I put solar panels and antenna on it just so it would look cool, but it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be something that you can rename, and putting it right here is a really good idea. Anybody who's doing SSTOs to low Kerbal orbit and back should have one of these, and I'll explain to you guys why. If any of you guys watch Cruzan AK's video on how to deorbit, you'll recognize this peninsula. I call it the Cruzan Peninsula, and I don't know what it's really called, but since I saw it in his video, I named it after him in my own head, you know, whatever. And I'll probably put a link to his video here. What it is if you're in orbit and get your periapsis in the deep atmosphere, you know, somewhere below like 25, over this peninsula, then you catch air on re-entry enough so that you drop out right on top of the Kerbal Space Center. It's also the most efficient return trajectory you can get on, because your periapsis, your lowest point in orbit, is barely in the atmosphere. You're not doing guesswork and really overburning and having a periapsis that drops off in the middle of the ocean, and then, you know, Kerbin's spin in addition to the drag drops you over here. No. If you set this here, and it depends on the mass of the vehicle. Heavier vehicles with less drag will need to go lower. Lighter vehicles with more drag will need to go higher. It depends. But for example, for the size of SSTO that I was just flying and that are at the station right now, if you set up a maneuver node so that your periapsis over this peninsula, the middle of this peninsula, is 20 kilometers, you'll almost perfectly drop out of the sky on top of the Kerbal Space Center. When landing some of these back here, in the case of, for example, Shuttle 2, if you look at it, it has a bunch of jet fuel left. I didn't have to fire the engines at all. I just came right down to the runway, almost perfectly. Apart from the rocket fuel that it took me to do the deorbit burn, no jet fuel was spent bringing this thing back. The other ones, you know, some of them were a little short, some of them were a little long. What I do when they're a little long is I just flip it over and kind of like do an idlement and just land. I can demonstrate that later. But as far as the beacon, you might be wondering how I dropped it there, and I will show you. That kind of there's probably simpler ways of doing this, but this way looks really fun. So I have a pretty high-speed little jet. This is not space capable. It's just a jet. It's not an SSTO. And it just has the beacon loaded on its back. Do not plop over. Always when people are watching. There we go. So now, I don't have any other useful place where I'm going to put a beacon. The peninsula is probably it. And the reason why I like putting the beacon is it gives me an exact point to aim at. And it's also really good for when I'm trying to do deorbit in the dark. Because when the peninsula is on the night side, I can't see it. And the majority of the times that I've misburned and ended up either in the ocean or landing back there in the grass somewhere, it's because I couldn't see the peninsula when I was doing my deorbit burn. So this basically works like this. You probably want to go a little slower. You go over the target area where you want to drop it. Hit G to drop the legs and hit space, and away it goes. Of course, you don't want to fly too far away from it so it doesn't despawn. And you probably want to drop it as low to the ground as you can so that it doesn't take an ice age to hit the ground. But that's how I put my little navigation beacon over there. Of course, like I said, the middle of the peninsula is the perfect place to put it. If you guys want more specifics on how to use that peninsula for navigation purposes, I do recommend Cruzan video. It's a great video. It really took a lot of the guesswork out of deorbiting my SSTOs after I watched that video. And before that, half of them would go over and I'd end up landing them over there. Half of them would end up barely clearing the mountains and landing here in the grass. Sometimes, not always, I'd end up in the water. Most of the times either on that runway or in the grass. But after I discovered that trick, well, it's been a lot easier. So, yeah, that was my mistake. I dropped that thing entirely too high. I kind of like the way it looks as it's coming down. And it, oh, I don't know if it's just this version after the patch, but the parachute also bugs out. It doesn't... You know how when you have it on a ship that you're flying and you touch the ground and it immediately disappears? And this one, for some reason, it just sits there like a hot air balloon looming over the probe for entirely too long, like 20-30 seconds more than it should. I think it looks kind of funny. That's the part where I crash. No! Dang it. So anyway, that's the conclusion to this video series. Thank you very much for watching as usual, and remember to fly safe, unlike me.